What's up, everybody? We have a bit of a primer for the Alec Baldwin trial that is coming up. We'll talk about a little bit the factual background, but most importantly, we're going to get our buddy Ben Chu's thoughts on representing high-profile clients like Alec Baldwin, what he's going to go through in this trial, what's most important to celebrities like this, how he would handle the situation, whether he thinks Baldwin's going to testify, all that and more on this interview. And we're going to get, like I said, some discussion of the facts. If you guys want to check out what we've already covered on the case, we have a full Alec Baldwin playlist that you can go check out. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that reminder bell so you don't miss any of the videos we do throughout this trial. We will likely do daily recaps and reactions to everything that happens in court throughout the entirety of the trial. And make sure you hit the like button on this video. All right, so we're going to listen to the Crime Fix here on Law and Crime as they kind of just discuss what's going on in this case a little bit of background about the case. Trial's coming up, I think, next week. And then we're going to get into them interviewing Ben Chu and react, see if we agree with him, disagree with him. We've had some situations where we're in lockstep. Sometimes we disagree a little bit. So it's fun either way. And make sure you guys leave your comments and questions in the comments. I'm sure most of you will agree with Ben Chu over me. But it's always fun to hear his perspective on stuff as somebody who obviously has experience representing high-profile clients like Alec Baldwin, although I think there are a lot of differences between Johnny Depp and Alec Baldwin. I am interested in what he has to say. A lot of you guys sent me this interview, so I thought it was kind of a good time with Baldwin's trial coming up and always getting this good insight. I haven't listened to it in its entirety, but you guys told me some of what he talks about. So I'm interested in seeing how this goes. Hopefully you are too. Let's get into it.
If that's a bullet that was pulled out of his shoulder, then someone loaded a live round into the gun I was holding.
Alec Baldwin is preparing to go on trial to defend himself against a manslaughter charge in the death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. So what does it take to represent an A-list celebrity at trial? Johnny Depp's lawyer is here with the scoop and his thoughts on what Alec Baldwin should be doing at trial. Should he testify? Thanks for joining me for Crime Fix. I'm Anjanette Levy. Alec Baldwin is one of Hollywood's elite. He's been in show business for more than 40 years now. You've seen him in movies, and you've seen him on TV in your living room. He can do comedy and drama. Some people love him, and others, not so much. That's pretty normal. He's had some encounters over the years with paparazzi, and there were those terrible voicemails that became public that he left for his then 11-year-old daughter, Ireland Baldwin, years ago.
Hey, I want to tell you something, okay? And I want to leave a message for you right now.
I should note that Ireland Baldwin later roasted her dad about that on Comedy Central, so there were no hard feelings. But Alec Baldwin isn't on trial for any of those things. He faces an involuntary manslaughter charge for the shooting death of his cinematographer, Helena Hutchins, on the set of Rust back in October of 2021. It's an absolute tragedy. Alec Baldwin will be a criminal defendant sitting in a courtroom listening to evidence being presented against him. Baldwin maintains he's not criminally responsible for Hutchins' death, even though he was holding the gun that fired and killed Hutchins. Baldwin maintains he didn't fire the gun. He talked to detectives with the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office shortly after the shooting, and he described what happened, making several statements.
Well, what's it?
So, and we're going to hear this, and this is always interesting because his statements and what he says is going to be some additional factors, additional facts. I think this trial is going to have a lot of similarities to Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, which we also covered, but I think it's going to have a lot of differences as well. And I like this synopsis. It's a pretty just clean, cut and dry what's going on in the case. But these statements by Alec Baldwin in this interview, but also in TV interviews, are going to be a big part of his trial.
Interesting, not to digress off of the commentary here, that we've done this for 2 weeks and we did it the right way every day. Every day. You're on a set, you rehearse, they bring you what's called a cold gun. The gun is either completely empty, the chambers, or there is a cosmetic piece. So for example, if you're the camera, and this is going to sound silly and specific, but if I'm pointing a gun close to the camera, you want to see into the cylinder that there's material in there, cosmetic material. So those rounds are cosmetic rounds. They put them in.
Baldwin said everything had been fine.
He gives a lot of details, which again, we're going to be digging into that a ton during his trial, would be my guess. We also did a complete recap and reaction of the TV interviews he did. If you want to check those out, they're on the Alec Baldwin playlist. I encourage you to do so before the trial to get an idea of what those interviews are. I'm going to go rewatch those interviews as well in preparation for the trial. But he's looking at involuntary manslaughter, which has a max of up to 18 months in prison. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer on set, was convicted not too long ago, and she was sentenced to the max 18 months. So you don't want to do 1 day in jail, let alone 18 months in prison for somebody like Alec Baldwin It's not good. There's a lot on the line here. This is a big deal. It is important. It's not just some slap on the wrist.
All week long, he described the scene he was practicing.
But this is all I know, and that is that I take the gun out in the rehearsal. He wants it very dramatic and very sudden, kind of sneak up on them. I take the gun out, and then they take, like, as it clears, as the barrel clears, I'll turn and cock the gun over here. I turn and cock the gun goes off. It's supposed to be a cold gun. Nothing. No flash charges, nothing.
And Baldwin described the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, clearing the gun, ensuring that it was safe, and then what happened when the gun fired.
Every time we've done this, I'm here to tell you, to testify that every time we've done this, she did it right. She cleaned the barrel, made sure nothing was lodged in there. We went hot when they were, you always announced, going hot. Crew gets ready. And then all of a sudden, you're the camera, and I shoot away from you. I sit there like, bang, 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 and flashes are coming out, and we shoot the rounds. She cleans the barrel every time, and she checks that the rounds are all
Every time she did it right. Well, it's not what a jury thought.
cosmetic rounds, or nothing in the chamber for the rehearsal. She hands me the gun. I'm assuming she's done it the right way. She's done it the last 2 weeks. I put it in the holster. I pull it out slow for rehearsing.
And he says, assuming she did it right. And that's the problem.
I don't feel anything. I pull it out slow, turn, cock the pistol, bang, it goes off, and she hits the ground.
Baldwin made another statement describing the rehearsal and pulling the gun from the holster and cocking the gun. Hutchins and director Joel Souza were setting up the shot for the scene.
There's nobody in my line. Nobody. And so when I shoot the gun, so in the rehearsal, I'm assuming I have an empty gun, and the gun goes off. She's right in front of me. She's as far from me as I am from the difference between maybe you and the door.
Okay. So pretty close proximity.
It was a very tight shot.
Okay.
The shot was here, of me, not of me. It's of me pulling the gun slowly, turn cock.
Okay.
And she's right there, vulnerable, in a position she wouldn't ordinarily be if we were shooting. And this one, boom, she hits the ground.
Now, this conversation with sheriff's detectives occurred after the shooting, as director Joel Souza and Helena Hutchins were being treated at the hospital. And going through Baldwin's police interview, he made one statement that was particularly curious to me.
That's a bullet.
But yeah, so that's what comes out of.
Well, I think the question, I don't want to tell you your job, but I'm so sick about this, so sickened by this, that a bullet passed through this girl's body. She's in critical condition in the hospital right now, and I fired the gun. And you don't think I feel really, really shitty about that, I do, but the question becomes, you ask Hannah, did you commingle live bullets? What they call live rounds. When they say live round, that's a bullet that a police officer would shoot. Where did that come from in her kit?
Did you catch that? Baldwin stated she, meaning Helena, is in critical condition at the hospital right now, and I fired the gun. Baldwin said he fired the gun. Later in the interview, he said the gun went off. A couple of months later.
And again, that's going to come down to pulling the trigger. Did he pull the trigger? Did he not? Is it possible for the gun to fire without him pulling the trigger? These are going to be questions the experts are going to have to answer. Baldwin has already made so many statements he's pretty much stuck with. Whether he testifies, whether he doesn't, these statements are going to come in. People are going to hear what he said, hear how he explained it with George Stephanopoulos or whatever his name is, that he did the interview with. He clearly said, I did not pull the trigger. We know the FBI and law enforcement has done some testing on the gun, and it seems like they're going to testify that that's impossible. Some of that came out with Hannah Gutierrez, but he also, and I give him credit, his immediate response is, did she commingle live rounds and dummy rounds? And if she did, that's the problem. That's the negligence. And he said that from the jump, and the instant reactions are usually the most true. This is before he's had time. Well, actually, he was on the phone, so we don't know who he was talking to, but I don't know that he would have time to concoct a story at this point.
In an interview with ABC News anchor George Stephanopoulos, Baldwin denied firing the gun.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
Alec Baldwin
Okay, great. They had that in there too. Even better.
May have to explain that discrepancy, or maybe he won't have to. I'll get to more on that later in the show with Ben Chu. Throughout Alec Baldwin's interview with the sheriff's detectives, he displayed some knowledge of guns from working on sets with guns in the past.
I know you said you don't own a gun, but are you experienced with shooting guns?
There's no doubt in my mind they're going to have an expert. So whatever Alec Baldwin says, there are going to be experts. What I want to know is, we didn't really get the high profile actor, what an actor's responsibility is or duty is expert during Hannah Gutierrez Reed, because clearly she was not. I'm interested to see if the state brings an expert like that for Baldwin's trial. We know there's going to be gun expert, ammunition experts, people that tested the gun, all sorts of stuff like that. There are issues with that too. Destructive testing and other issues that very high priced lawyers are going to fight very hard for Alec Baldwin.
Only as much as actors have to be experienced.
Okay. Which is normally not.
I mean, if you do a movie, safety with weapons is primary. You go off with people. You go off with armaments people to ranges. I've gone to ranges in Arizona where we shot a lot of guns many years ago, and you go to a range and you shoot for a few hours, and they teach you how to shoot shotguns, Walther, different, little small guns, James Bond guns, big guns, Uzis, machine guns, whatever you're using, they make you go and rehearse for hours.
Alec Baldwin also told the detectives who handed him the Colt 45 revolver that day.
Right before this incident, Hannah handed you the gun and said, Colt. It wasn't Dave.
I don't recall. No, Hannah handed me the gun.
Okay, it wasn't anybody else but Hannah.
No, Hannah handed me the gun.
And she specifically says.
I believe she said Colt.
Alec Baldwin was emphatic that armorer Hannah Gutierrez Reed
Wrong.
handed the gun to him.
She comes in. She hands me the gun all the time.
And then what?
If there's any shooting involved in the scene, she always hands me the gun.
Never has Dave handed you the gun.
Never.
Okay.
But in the ABC interview, Baldwin made it sound as if Dave Halls handed him the gun.
I'm handed a gun and someone declares, they said, this is a cold gun.
Dave Halls.
The first day, Dave.
Alec Baldwin also ruled out the possibility that someone deliberately put a live round in that revolver.
They've been very safety conscious here throughout. That's what puzzles me.
Well,
They
and
didn't have anything.
yeah, and I guess that's more like the question that I'm trying to get at is, do you think someone would deliberately do this?
I can't imagine who would.
Before Baldwin ever started talking with sheriff's detectives, the interview room camera recorded him talking with his wife and someone else.
No, what I am is someone who, I don't want to do this for a living anymore. I don't want to be a public person. And, I'm the one holding the gun in my hand that everybody was supposed to have taken care of. They always hand me a cold gun. Where are you now?
Hey, everybody. I want to take a second to tell you about
Isn't that interesting to think about?
Really on what are the
they have conversations with his wife as well on camera that they can use against him. Very interesting. I mean, we're going to get a lot of that in this trial. And now we get to the man of the hour, Ben Chu's thoughts. What's he think about this? What does he think Baldwin's going to do?
challenges of representing an A-list celebrity who really, lives in a different world from the rest of us. They really do have a different lifestyle than most normal people.
And Jeanette, first, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me on. It is different representing someone of Alec Baldwin's stature. They do live in a different world. They tend to be very concerned about their public image. So I can understand why, he felt compelled not only to speak with the police, but also to go on national television and give an interview with George Stephanopoulos. I mean, first of all, that's not something an average person can do. And secondly, the average person is less concerned with his or her public image than a prominent actor, entertainer, or politician might be.
He said something really interesting. I don't know if he realized he was being recorded during his interview with the sheriff's detectives, but they hadn't come in yet. And he said to someone he was talking on the phone with, I believe it was either his wife or someone he was close to. And he said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be a public person anymore. And I thought that was really interesting because he has been in the public eye for more than 40 years now. He's an A-list celebrity. And maybe it just gets to be too much sometimes, the glare.
And that's another very different part of this case than Hannah Gutierrez Reed. And it can cut in your favor, as we've seen with Johnny Depp and even Gwyneth Paltrow potentially, but it can also cut against you depending on how people feel about you. We've seen that with Amber Heard. We've seen that with some political people that have lost trials recently on both sides of the aisle, that people liking you and people not liking you can cut both ways in these types of trials. So some people, like she said in the beginning, like Alec Baldwin, some people don't. How is that going to affect how a jury looks at him? Are they going to think he's the jerk? Are they going to think we saw some clips from the actual cuts from the movie where he's yelling at people. He's going rogue. He's doing whatever he wants to do. He's the big man on campus. Nobody's going to tell him no. Nobody's going to tell him what to do. He is the boss over everybody. So he's then therefore responsible for everything. And being responsible for everything, is he liable? Does that include criminal liability? Those are all going to be questions for this jury.
And the scrutiny. And this brought him under tremendous scrutiny.
And Jeanette, that's a really interesting comment. I hadn't heard that he'd made that statement. It doesn't surprise me. I've represented a few very prominent people in Hollywood, and they deal with it differently. A number of them deal with it. They go into semi-seclusion at times, and a lot of them have been taken advantage of by people they thought were their friends. So they tend to have kind of a very close-knit group of people around them. They're security people, very, very close friends. So they often live in a bit of a cocoon. I think that probably I think they live in a bubble. Yeah, that's a better word. And I think that becomes tiresome with them. I remember at one point during the Debbie Heard trial, Johnny just wanted to go out and take a walk. at night. It was a rare balmy night in Fairfax in May, and he wanted to go out and take a walk. And whereas you or I could go out and do that without having to make arrangements, he had to get his security ready. They had to map out the route. It's just things that you and I take for granted, they can't do. And I can see him getting very frustrated. And this would be a traumatic event for anybody, whether you're Alec Baldwin or somebody on the street. But I think it had to be exacerbated by the fact that as a public figure, this was going to draw an enormous amount of extra scrutiny. And perhaps an ordinary person would never have even been charged under these circumstances.
Well, Alec Baldwin is somebody who,
So that's interesting. An ordinary person may have not even been charged. So a couple things about that. Number one, we have evidence to the contrary a little bit because Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was a normal person and she was charged, right? Some would say she had more responsibility than Baldwin. Some would say she has less, but she is a normal person and she was charged. But secondarily, these specific facts of this happening on a movie set, nobody involved being some high profile celebrity is probably not as likely as some of the other crimes. So I understand what he's getting at, but specifically kind of his prominence, his celebrity, what he did, why people know him is inextricably intertwined with the crimes and the facts that happened in this case.
Ruffle some feathers. I mean, he's had brushes with the paparazzi in the past. He can be a bit of a kind of a bruiser of sorts. He's from Long Island. He's actually very eloquent when you listen to him speak in public or even in this police interview that he did.
He is a skilled orator, as they say.
The sheriff's detectives. So he is well-spoken. You can tell he's well-read, but at the same time, he can get kind of rough and tumble when he has to. The courtroom is a much different place though, than walking around in Manhattan or in Long Island or wherever you're living. So what, if you're advising him, if you're representing Alec Baldwin, how do you advise him when he shows up to court every day to kind of present himself? Because this isn't going to be like the Johnny Depp trial, where you show up and there are going to be alpacas running around and stuff like that. This is a trial. This is a trial where a woman lost her life. There is a much different vibe. So how do you advise Alec Baldwin to present himself when he appears in court? Because he hasn't shown up for any of the pretrial hearings.
That's a great question, Anjanette. I would advise him first and foremost, as you would your clients, to assume that at any given moment in the courtroom, there is at least one juror looking at him. In other words, no matter who is testifying, whether the judge is speaking, no matter what's happening, there will be at least one juror and perhaps several jurors looking at him. So his demeanor, even when not speaking, is absolutely crucial. You're right. This is not going to be like the Deputy Heard trial. There are not going to be any moments of levity at all. So,
and I actually think it's a little sad to say it was okay for levity to happen in that, or as if that wasn't very serious, because there were some very serious topics going on. But I think the way he handled the question was correct, that there were moments of levity, not that the charges or what was going on or the facts weren't serious.
This is not going to be appropriate for him to be smiling, to be joking around with his attorney, mugging for the cameras. He's going to have a dead serious demeanor and just assume that he is essentially the focus of everybody's attention every second he's in the courtroom, and he's going to have to behave accordingly. If that means he has to look down, that's fine. And
again, we can just use the trial experience we have, especially even if you're just watching them on YouTube, because how defendants act, look, behave, their mannerisms in the courtroom makes a difference. When you're a celebrity, all the more important. Even if you become a minor true crime celebrity like Karen Reed, it's something people talk about. It's something people focus on. It's something the jury focuses on, the jury talks about. And he's exactly right. People are absolutely going to be focused on him the entire time. What is his demeanor? Where is he looking? How's he reacting? Is he sad enough? Is he too sad? Is he faking it? Is he not? We heard that with Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell and Alec Murdoch and Gwyneth Paltrow and Johnny Depp and Amber Heard and everybody, every party in the case, in the trial, they're going to be paying attention to, especially the biggest name and face.
He can't inject any levity. As you said, a young woman is dead here, and it's a tragedy. So that would be thing one. And I think to the extent, and we'll probably get to this a little later, there's going to be a momentous decision as to whether he testifies. I think he could be a very compelling witness for the reasons you say. He's telegenic, he is articulate, he is intelligent. That can be a double-edged sword, but I think if is dedicated to prep, I think he could make for a very compelling witness in his own defense.
Well, now that you've gone there, let's talk about that, because there is a question about.
So they're going to get into whether or not he's going to testify. The title says Depp's lawyer on Alec Baldwin. He has to testify. So number one, he is a professional actor, right? So you would think they'll be the best at testifying. Number two, he's smart. He's well read. He's gotten into a lot of things. No surprise that he would know how to handle questions and deal with it. But number three, and the biggest factor here, is he's already given so many interviews, public interviews with police, on TV, and he's already got a story. It's pretty much locked in. If he testifies, which I think he'll testify to, he's got to stick to that story. He can't change it. He'll be impeached. He'll be hammered for it. He can't, the double-edged sword about being intelligent and well-read and knowing what you're talking about and, eloquent is you're not going to be able to say, I don't know, I don't understand, I was confused. You're not going to be able to get away with that as much as maybe a simpleton would. That's somebody that's just, your average person of average intelligence. That's just like, I was confused. I didn't understand. And we've seen witnesses and parties get away with that. I don't think he's going to get away with that type of response if he changes his story.
I remember back when Johnny Depp was on the stand at trial, and a lot of people I know
in a civil case, which he basically had to testify because the other side could have called him. Very different in a criminal case.
Who work in the news business, or even my family members, a lot of people are like, well, he's an actor. Of course he can get up there and he can act and he can do this or he can do that. I mean, they don't know Johnny Depp from Adam, right? I mean, none of us do. We know what we see in interviews or have seen in interviews in the past, or what we've seen in maybe his films and things of that nature. But is there a concern that when you put a client on the stand that is an actor, that they act and that maybe they're not just being themselves?
So from his perspective, as mostly handling civil cases, and again, mostly I handle civil cases now too, but I've handled a bunch of criminal cases too, is when you're talking about putting your client on the stand in a civil case, they have to. So you prepare it the best you can. In a criminal case, sometimes you preparing it the best you can still isn't good enough. So you're like, it's not going to happen. I don't want to put them on. It seems too fake or coached or just horrible, or they can't answer questions, or they're so nervous it seems like they're lying even if they're not lying. So those considerations come up, and they're very different in a criminal case than a civil case. Even if they're really good, you have to take other things into account in a criminal case because you don't have to put them on the stand. In a civil case, they're always going to end up on the stand.
Yes, that is a real concern. In Johnny's case, we weren't, because that was him. He wasn't acting. That was the real him. And we knew that this was very important for him. There had been a prior trial in London where he really didn't have the opportunity to testify and to tell his story. The way that system works, as you know, there's no direct examination. You're just subject to cross-examination where you're saying yes or no. So he was committed, win or lose, to telling his story in his own voice. So in that case, he wasn't acting. He was telling the truth. I won't say anything about the other side in that one way or the other, but it is a concern generally. And I would advise Mr. Baldwin, if I could be so presumptuous, to really be authentic. And if he does testify, to show his emotions, because I recall shortly thereafter, he really appeared genuinely devastated, not only because he was...
Agreed. And I think that's something that really cut against Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who was not as genuinely broken up about it like he was. Now, he probably had a different relationship with Helena and Joel and everything involved. And so maybe that's why, but I do agree with him that immediately the Baldwin reaction was better than Hannah Gutierrez-Reed if we're going to compare the two.
In hot water, but I think he legitimately cared about Helena Hutchins, and why wouldn't he? I mean, they got to know each other very well. You can't manufacture these things, but I think it would be very helpful for him to cry if that's this is not the time for him to be the tough guy with several brothers from the hood. This is the time for him to show all of his emotions, not to make it about him, but to show grief not for himself but for her. That's not admitting that he's guilty of a crime. That's just being human. And I would think that was crucial to the defense, that if he testifies, that the jurors see how much this kills him inside.
We have him on video on a police interview talking about what happened that day.
And just to be clear, if anybody's thinking Ben Chu is being slimy in some kind of way, saying you got to make your client cry, it's important to make your client cry. That's not what he's saying. He's saying don't hold back the tears. Because a lot of times, I'll tell you right now, with my clients, especially when they go through tragedies, because in civil trials, a lot of wrongful death, you have family members that'll testify, or, serious injury cases where people's lives have changed because of the accident, the injuries, the treatment that they're going to have. Their future has changed, a lot of medical treatment going. But when they testify, they get so nervous and they want to get through it as quick as they can. And they don't want to show emotion. They don't want to get choked up. They don't want to stumble over their words because of how, emotionally draining and taxing it is for them. You got to tell them, now is the time. It's important. It sucks. I don't want to put you through it. But in order for the jury to understand what you're going through, what you went through, what your family member went through, you have to show the raw emotion and be real. Don't hold back tears. If you feel like crying, cry. Don't stop yourself. That's what it sounds like. It's not make sure you cry. You're an actor. You've cried before. You got to cry. It's not what he's saying. So just in case, I'm not saying anybody's saying that's what he's saying. I just want to make sure nobody thinks that and hammers him for it, or any lawyer that tells their clients or witnesses to show the genuine raw emotion that they have about the situation and what they see, saw, or witnessed to.
And he talks about kind of shooting the gun. And then he talks to George Stephanopoulos in an interview with ABC News months later saying, I didn't pull the trigger, that wasn't in the script. It wasn't going to go off or whatever. So we have kind of some statements here that the jury could see as conflicting. So do you think that he has to testify? I mean, no defendant in criminal court, and in the criminal courts in our country, has to testify. I mean, he has the right to not testify and take the stand. But is this something you would advise, that maybe he does testify to explain what he believes happened and what was going on that set? Because not only is he facing criminal liability, but civil liability as well.
I think he has to testify. I think the original sin, and I don't mean a sin in the literal sense, but I think his mistake was giving a prior statement, certainly giving conflicting.
Yeah, I mean, that interview was definitely a mistake. I don't know that he has to testify. I would not say he has to testify, but I think he should, because I think he will do a good job. I think the jury's going to want to hear from him. I think that whatever his story and his truth is, that's ultimately what the jury's going to have to decide, if there is any criminal action or activity based on what he says he did. And if there are inconsistencies, he's just going to have to explain them in the best way possible.
Statements to the police and on national TV to George Stephanopoulos was an enormous mistake, because, as you said, now you have contradictory statements. I pulled the trigger. I didn't pull the trigger. I think he needs to explain.
I don't think he said I pulled the trigger. I think he said I fired the gun. I fired the weapon. And I think he can explain that the definition of that is not the same thing as pulling the trigger. What he meant is he's holding the gun when it fires or it goes off, but he didn't do anything to fire it. And if that's the inconsistency they're talking about, I don't remember him saying he pulled the trigger ever in any interview. But maybe I missed it.
Explain what his recollection of the truth was. And as we talked about off camera, there is another possibility, which is that he may subjectively believe that he did not pull the trigger or do anything affirmatively to cause the bullet to hit her and the other gentleman, but that he just doesn't remember it. I mean, this happened in a split second. I mean, he's very clear on the fact that he thought the gun was not loaded. I don't think there's any reason to believe that he thought the gun was loaded or that he had any intent to, put her in that kind of danger. But I think it's a plausible scenario, and I've seen it in a civil case I handled, where the person just subjectively cannot believe that he did this, because that would just exacerbate his own guilt. So I think it's quite possible that he simply doesn't remember, and unfortunately, he's made his life, if that's the truth, then he's made his life more complicated by coming out so clearly and saying, I did not pull the trigger. Because now there are going to be some jurors, especially if he doesn't testify, who think he was lying about that. Because as I understand, the forensic evidence, does not support at least one version of his account. I think he's going to have to explain all of it.
And we know some of the expert testimony, but I do think we're going to get additional expert testimony even from the state. Of course, we're going to get different and additional expert testimony from Baldwin and his team, but I think we may even get some different and additional stuff from the state than what we saw during Hannah Gutierrez Reed's trial. But I don't remember him saying I pulled the trigger. I got to go back and look now, because now I'm questioning myself. I know he was saying I was holding. I know he said I fired it, things like that. I don't remember him saying specifically I pulled the trigger.
And I think the more accepting of fault and the possibility that he didn't remember everything, I think the more sympathetic the jury is going to be for him.
He repeatedly says in his police interview he explains how they rehearse and being given a cold gun and what that means and what the armor did each day that, week and things of that nature. So it's interesting to listen to him recount all of this during the police interview. And he
I
was
think that's
concerned that he was
terrible
going
for
to be.
him. I didn't mean to interrupt and mention it. I just think that's terrible for him. The more that he says that he knows what he's doing, that he has been trained, and you never point a loaded gun at a person, and
that is the biggest problem. You never point a gun at a person. And those are going to be the nuances. And I've got to go back and re-listen to the interview again, because there's definitely a lot they're going to use. And I picked out a ton of it when I did my breakdown of the interview. So I got to go watch that. I might even watch my breakdown of it so I can remind myself what I argued there. But he's going to have to stick to I didn't pull the trigger. He can't go back to I pulled the trigger. He's got to stick to it. He was too unequivocal about it, and just deal with what the experts say. And even deal with some of his old statements if they want to make it sound like that's what he said he did and that he changed his story. That's fine. But I think his story is going to be, there's no way there should have been live ammo. And if there was no live ammo, this never would have happened. And nothing I did is what caused it. It all comes back to Hannah Gutierrez, to the live ammo, not to anything I did. I'm very interested on how his attorneys handle it and how he handles his own statements.
He also, as I remember from that interview, he's talking about the wadding that can be in a gun. He didn't think that even after the accident, that there had been a bullet fired, that he thought that it might be a wadding that kept the gunpowder together. And when the wadding is expelled, that can cause injury. And so she thought that actually she may have had a heart attack or suffered, an injury from the wadding. All of that, I think, is really bad for him, because
There's a lot about guns. Yes,
he knows all about guns. And so now his attorney can't say, look, he's an actor. He's just an actor. You had an armorer. She was supposed to be the expert. Then there was another employee on the set. I mean, there are at least two people on the set who were supposed to be responsible for the gun, to make sure it was safe, to make sure that it wasn't actually loaded. But it's harder for him now to make that argument, because he's like, I know you don't point a gun at a person. I know you don't pull the trigger. That's where, we talked about earlier about his intelligence being a double-edged sword. He doesn't want people to think that he's an idiot or that he was careless. But in doing that, as a public persona, protecting his image, I think he's really made his defense a lot more complicated.
When he shows up for court, do you expect people to be there? You might have some looky-loos there hanging out, but do you expect him to put on a PR offensive at this trial? I mean, as we mentioned, this is not a civil case. This is not the Depp v. Heard trial. Do you expect him to have maybe supporters hanging out there, things of that nature? Or do you think this will be a little more toned down? And it's out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's not easy to get there.
Yeah, I would hope not. I would hope that his people would definitely not encourage that and actively discourage that. I think there will be people who are curious. He has a lot of fans. He's a terrific actor. He's a great comedic actor, famous family. So I think there's going to be a lot of media attention. You're going to be there. I mean, it's a big deal. But I really hope, for his sake, and really for everyone's sake, for the victim's family, that there isn't a circus-like atmosphere. I don't think there will be. I think people will understand that there's nothing happy about this. There's nothing.
It didn't stop a lot of other trials from there being a circus-like atmosphere, like Murdaugh, Karen Reed, etc. But I hope there is not. I do think one's a little bit different based on the location and where it is, and the fact that we've already seen Hannah Gutierrez Reed trial. Maybe there's not as much anticipation. I don't know. And that it's manslaughter. It's not a more serious crime that he's been charged with. I'm interested to see how it all unfolds.
This isn't about, Mr. Depp's case. It was about his vindication. There's going to be no vindication for Alec Baldwin. I mean, the best case scenario is for him is that there's no criminal liability, but he's not going to come out of this a hero. People are going to say, well, he made a mistake, but he shouldn't suffer for it criminally. There's no good outcome. I mean, a young woman is dead, as you said at the beginning. I think that's where you start and that's where you end. So
civilly, in my opinion, and for whatever that's worth, this is a slam dunk case. He absolutely has liability, negligent or not. His actions caused this at some level, could have prevented it, whatever. The real question is just, does it reach the level of criminal liability? That's the real question.
I hope everybody treats it with the solemnity that it deserves.
Most certainly. And it doesn't matter if you believe after seeing the evidence that he is not guilty or guilty. This is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy on many sides. It's the biggest tragedy for Helena Hutchins' family. It's terrible. She was a mother and a wife and a sister and a daughter. And it's tragic. And in the words of Dave Halls, the first AD, it should never, ever happen again. Ben Chu, thank you so much for coming on.
So I think that's a good little primer. We get to hear from Ben Chu, gets us back in the Alec Baldwin swing of things. And again, there's a lot of other videos already I'm going to go back and watch in kind of preparation for the trial. But I like to see how it's presented at trial. I like to see what they choose, what they don't choose, how they explain it. There's going to be a lot of similarities to the Hannah Gutierrez Reed case, a lot of emotional testimony like we saw in that case as well. I expect that. And so we got to be ready for that. I wonder how long it's going to take them to pick a jury. So they're starting to pick the jury, I think, on July 9th, which is next Tuesday. I wonder how many days it takes them to pick a jury. Because I think a lot of people know Alec Baldwin, right? I mean, I think he's maybe second to Johnny Depp. I mean, is Gwyneth Paltrow more famous than him? I don't know, but he's a top 3 name of any trial that we have covered, in my opinion, as far as nationwide and worldwide notoriety. So let me know what you think. Let me know what questions overarching you have about this trial, what you're interested in seeing, what interests you most about this trial, how you think it's going to go, what you think the result's going to be based on what you know right now. Whatever questions and comments you have, I'm going to take a look at them later. Hit the like button on your way out if you haven't already. Make sure you subscribe so you're ready to watch and recap and react to this trial with me. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.